Alright, stop. Whatever you're doing, TJ's back, the airwaves we're chewing, rocking. A G.I. Joe podcast, interview special, questions will be asked. Will it ever stop? Yo, I don't think so, not as long as someone's publishing Joe. Artists, writers, G.I. Joe fanboys, let's get this thing started and hope we don't annoy our guest. In the studio right now, they've come in for a chat discussing when, where and how. Probing, we're going in deep. Anything left, we might as well be asleep. Questioning them about the G.I. Joe history, unwrapping answers like a whodunit mystery. TJ interview. TJ interview. TJ interview.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the biggest and longest and best dedicated comic podcast that I present. If you're new to the show, you can find out all of the details at the website talkingjoe.co.uk. But today we are talking G.I. Joe Disavowed, the Devil's Due run, and doing it in a big way with a very special guest. As usual, I am joined by my co-hosts. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark. Hello, listeners, and hello to our guest, who Mark's going to reveal in a moment. I am so excited to chat and ask questions.
And also, it's G.I. Jay Cordray.
Hello, Mark, Tim, fellow G.I. Joe enthusiasts, and our mystery guest to be revealed now.
And if you haven't read the name of the podcast title, then you will be surprised to hear that our very special guest is none other than Josh Blaylock, founder and publisher of Devil's Due Comics, writer of G.I. Joe's issues 1 to 25 from the Devil's Due run, and the 2003 G.I. Joe vs. Transformers crossover, and the Dreadnoks Declassified mini, and the Arashikage Showdown one-shot. And beyond the world of G.I. Joe, Josh has been involved in the creation of many more comics, including, but not limited to, Mercy Sparx, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Freshman Force, Sparx the Barbarian, the Bitcoin Comic Handbook, How to Self-Publish Comics, and other recent projects including Arkworld and the Encoded. Josh is also the Chief Creative and Executive Officer of Popcultivator. Welcome, Josh.
Hello.
Hello. It's great to have you on, and we're very enthused because we have been talking Devil's Due comics for a number of months and reading them and poring over all of the details. So it's great to have you on and to get your insight from the era. It's almost 20 years on. How does it feel looking back at that time now?
That was all a whirlwind, man. It was super grateful for it, and it's weird. It's not as hard to believe that it was 20 years ago as it is to wrap my head around, like, that I have now not touched the property like twice as long as it was since Marvel stopped it and we picked it up. Like the gap. And that it's, that 80s retro is still going, which when we kicked that off in 2001, I never expected it would still be this phenomenon like it is now. So yeah, it's wild.
And does it still kind of feel like it was almost yesterday, or does it feel, because a day in the office for me, I can't remember what I did last week, never mind what I was doing this time 20 years ago. How does that feel? Because people are gonna be coming up to you every time you're having an appearance, bringing out these comics from 20 years ago, given the importance to them.
I'll read it's funny. I remember like making the books and remember like what, traveling around to conventions and events and things. But the hardest thing to remember sometimes is I'll go back to read the story. Like, did I write this? and then it comes back to you and like, oh yeah. So it's fun. You have to get that far away from it before you can actually read it from a perspective of some like fresh eyes,
Is there a part of you, Josh, that still kind of has to pinch yourself sometimes and say, I got to write G.I. Joe. How cool is that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, that's when, when you're just doing a little bit of introspective gratification. I mean, how the hell did, I end up with that, like it's always like, no matter how hard you try.
At 22.
Yeah. Now what the part of the story people don't know is I was obsessively serious about trying to become a professional comic book person since I was like 14. And then I published for 1996 up through 2000 and everything. And I'd been publishing nationally, kind of unknown before that. So that is there. It's the adage of, the harder you work, the luckier you get. But still, the chances that I actually scored this huge property as basically a kid, that's insane. Who does that? that like that. That's some serious like universe luck there.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Was it a sense of like no fear at the time? Was it as just a self belief and just putting yourself out there, or is kind of looking back on it and what you achieved very different to kind of what was going on in your mind at the time? We're quite similar ages. I was would have been a similar age to you at the in my very early 20s when the Devil's Due book was first coming out, and sort of making my way in my first paid employment and that kind of thing. And there was just no way that I would have even dreamt of that I could have achieved something like that on my young shoulders. Yeah, how did it feel for you at the time?
I definitely, I had zero doubt in my mind that was going to be hugely successful, and it was a matter of like, how do I get this done? I definitely am wired where for whatever, I'm just lacking the gene of like being afraid to risk everything to try something like that.
Right.
Probably to a fault. But I don't know. I guess I'm kind of zen and like stoic when it comes to like what's the worst going to happen? I'm going to lose everything and not, as long as I'm not going to die, and I got a family and stuff, I'm fine. But like that said, and it was also like the alternative was doing something else that I would be miserable doing, which would be like not working in comics. That was the only thing I wanted to do at the time. But what really motivated me with G.I. Joe was the fact that I couldn't believe how crazy people were in my head that they didn't understand how big this would be. So it was more with me, like, it wasn't even about me. It was like, are you out of your mind? You don't think this is going to work? Like, do you have any idea how badly people want this to come back and be brought back the right way? Do you know how many times my friends and I have just sat around, like, bullshitting about, like, oh man, I really wish they'd bring this back and make it all badass and stuff, So, and it wasn't like I didn't have any little, like, proof of concepts either. I guess it probably helps to go through a timeline a little bit, In high school, I was always like making t-shirts and stuff and like selling them as like a little side hustle. I was, known as like the guy in high school that could draw. And I had redone our school mascot, which hadn't been touched in like 30 years or something. So it was the Oak Hills Highlanders. So it was an excuse to draw a big barbarian dude. But then I made these like little Autobot magnets, and got them. I wanted one for my own car. But I like instantly would sell out of them. So it was like, oh man, that was fun. And then, because I had to make a bunch in order to just get myself a few, you couldn't just make like two. But then, started getting my feet wet, self-publishing, like, I was 18, doing my own black and white comics, getting them distributed, going to conventions, like whatever conventions there were at the time. And, I did kind of sabotage going to a proper art school, like a formal art school, and getting any kind of art degree, because I went to a really like hard grinding, like go there every day boot camp type of commercial art school, and to learn about graphic design and advertising and all that. Just waiting, the clock ticking, waiting to be able to get out there and be an adult and make comics. So anyway, I stumbled into this job after a few false starts that was a t-shirt licensing company, and they were just doing like goofy like sayings on your shirts, like drink your beer. There's sober kids in India, and goofy crap like that. And lots of hippie stuff, lots of like tie dye and kind of Grateful Dead stickers and things like that. And then they wanted to do like some kind of 80s retro thing, and they started bringing up all these sports things that I didn't know anything about. And I just said, man, you guys got to do like Transformers and G.I. Joe. And they're like, I showed them an Autobots or Decepticon symbol and Cobra symbol. And if you don't know what a Decepticon symbol is and you've never seen it before, it kind of looks like weird tribal art tattoos or something. And they just kind of laughed at me. And I argued with, it was like me, the two bosses that owned the company, and one secretary was the whole company. And I argued with them I was like, no, you've got to do this. And they had some ins with like Hot Topic. It was a big retail store here in the States. And another one at the time called Gadzooks and some others. They said, all these buyers said no. And the thing was that nobody wanted this thing from the 80s. They were like, why would anybody buy this old stuff? And that was the first time where I actually got angry and kind of like snapped at my boss. I was like, you call that buyer back right now and you tell her to show that to any dude in the office who's 20 to 25 years old and tell me they don't want that. I don't know what came out of me, but that just kind of rolled out of my mouth, and he did it, and they called back and they ordered 2,000 units of these like Transformer stickers. Well, the problem was it wasn't licensed yet. So my boss, or one of them, they started talking to Hasbro legal and everything, and they couldn't even get Hasbro legal to write a contract for it. Hasbro was confused why they wanted 1980s versions of Transformers. They were like, why would, no, we were doing Beast Machines, we're doing Beast Wars, we're doing that. And he's like, no, we want the old classic, like 1984 Optimus Prime. And they're like, oh, no, we're not licensing that. So dude hangs up the phone and just goes, well, we'll just bootleg it. And well, they underestimated how popular it was going to be. And fast forward about, 6 months, and we've got a line called Old School through every mall in North America, at least in America. Selling, there's like hundreds of thousands of dollars of shirts of Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man, Thundercats, everything. And all like My Little Pony and Rainbow Bright. And we brought the 80s stuff into the retail market for the first time ever. And most of it was bootleg. I was just an employee, but they were cranking this stuff out. I was just happy to have this job, basically creating this line and drawing this stuff. And they did so, but we got the Voltron license, we got the TMNT license, we got so they started getting all these real licenses, and I learned how to do licensing that way. And then they'd just be like, hey, you ever been to Vegas? I'm like, no. And they're like, all right, well, we got a trade show there, you got to put the booth together. So I really got a crash course in setting up a professional trade show. So I'm like, that's how, when I'm like 21 or 22, I've got that experience that was just a weird batch, plus still self-publishing and going to every convention I could in my like $400 car every other weekend. So then it started, had a good amount of freelance work on the side too, getting paid, and it was a fantastic job. And then Hasbro came. We were at New York Comic Con. Not New York Comic Con. There was no New York Comic. We were at the New York Boutique Show, I think it's called. It's an apparel fashion trade show. So I'm in this. Actually, here's really weird serendipity. That's where I first sketched up the Devil's Due logo while I was bored at the booth. And I was thinking of like, oh, this would be a cool T-shirt line called Devil's Due, and it'd be like kind of like punk rock, kind of like, but it doesn't really mean anything. It could also be, the name of a studio. It could be the name of a band. It could be the name of, just Devil's Due sounds like a cool name. And then in the hotel later, they got a call from the secretary that they got a cease and desist letter from Hasbro, like a serious one about everything. So someone else who already had a relationship with Hasbro had come in, and they saw that, like, hey, why is all this stuff selling? hey, Hasbro, and they just went and they gave Hasbro a check and said, hey, we do shirts with you guys now, and they had a track record to show, like, when my bosses went to Hasbro, they were like, what the hell's this stuff? When this company went to Hasbro, they were like, look how much this stuff is selling. It's super popular. We'll give you a check. So, kind of like, I guess that's like end chapter 1 or whatever, or the prologue. I had seen that my thoughts were validated. You know, you're talking about probably $1 million worth of shirts sold at the time, and so 2 years are going by, and I mean, it's wild, you know, because I'm going to a Comic-Con in another state, and I'm like, oh my God, people are wearing our shirts all over the place. They're in every mall. This is so amazing. And I know all those people have been coming into comic book shops, you know? I mean, that's the mark, that's the crowd, you know? So, a couple years later go by. I left that job. It was an awesome job, but I was just so obsessed with wanting to do comics. I was just miserable, not, you know, just working the day job. And I had enough freelance. I decided to leave. This was all in Cincinnati, Ohio, by the way. I decided to leave the job, start Devil's Due as a studio. And then, you know, I thought, all right, I'm going to probably spend another 5 years making comics and building my name up. And finally, if I don't hit it big, one of my friends will hit it big, and then we'll all come up together at somehow. And that was the plan. And I said, you know what, I know how to do the licensing offers now. I've got to try to get one of these 80s things that I love. And it's like, okay, let's try. We had sent this like amazing licensing package to Hasbro. I went out and bought a full size like ammo container. Shame on me for forgetting the name of those, because I'm gonna offend all the military people. You know, but like, unlock the metal. We put like file folders in there and all, it was like super badass. And then now I know why nobody cared at Hasbro, because they didn't even know who those characters were, you know, at the time. So they just got this thing like, what the hell's this? And I emailed Hasbro, which this sounds so weird because it's so long ago and how fast things have changed. Like, just to send an email blindly back then was like kind of like a new thing, you know, like you weren't having a formal meeting or anything. And I said I was interested in G.I. Joe, and, you know, and to my shock, I got a response, and I started going back and forth. And next thing I know, I had a deal accepted. I had to give him like $15,000 up front against a $30,000 guarantee, and it was a ridiculous 15% royalty, which is absurd. Ooh. That's 50% higher than any standard royalty in like that kind of licensing. And I said, of course. And I was like, okay, I really wasn't happy in Cincinnati, and I wanted to move to Chicago. And I was like, okay, there's no way in hell this is gonna happen. But if it does, I'm gonna have to set up roots and build a company and stuff. And I had a job lined up for an animation studio from a friend of mine, and, you know, it paid like $15 an hour to like just do like grunt work. And I said, okay, cool, that's all I need, and moved here. And then, like, I don't know, like 2 months later, they laid everybody off. It was part of the George Bush No Child Left Behind like funding, and then like, which actually never got funded really. So they laid everybody off, and except for a handful of people. And so I was like, okay, I get the G.I. Joe contract, like it's actually happening. And then I got laid off, so I was like, okay, this is insane. I've got to come up with the money, and I've got to like work these temp jobs and not let Hasbro know that I'm working these temp jobs and that I'm not a real full-on company. So but it happened. And
had you met them in person by this point? It can't surely have been all by email.
Not at all, which was very weird back in 2001. Wow. That was highly unusual, not like it is now. And now it's.
Did you have?
I mean, you had back then. You had to like still pay to get your phone system set up at the office. I mean, it was considered like unprofessional to only do business on a cell phone.
Did you have an entertainment lawyer when you were talking with Hasbro, or was it just you?
Just me. I had read a lot of contracts since I was like 16, because I had offers from publishers in the early 90s when I was a terrible artist, but there were also a lot of terrible publishers, and I got really fortunate with this high school that I went to. I guess shout outs to Oak Hill School District. Was as damn near close to a high-end private school as you could get in a public school situation. I got, and which is great because I lived in Florida before that, and all the schools were just terrible. And I was just trying not to get beat up. But then, I had a very forward-thinking graphic design teacher who we literally learned how to do setup on this program back in the day called Quark Express, and then we made our own. We developed our own prints, and then we put them on the printing press and printed. I mean, we learned everything. That guy was amazing. And then Mr. Ramses, and then there was this other. There was the gym coach had a business. There was an elective for like a third of the year where you could do a business class, and they taught like some business fundamentals. And so I was the only kid where I was like, oh, hey, by the way, hey teacher, can you look at this contract I got from this publisher? I think it's garbage and I tried to rewrite it. Can you take a look at it? And and he's just like, who does this? That was my best thing I had for a lawyer at the time. But so this was years later. I'm like 22, and I just read the contract myself, and I was familiar with the licensing deals that the other company had gotten. So the reality is it's Hasbro. That's those to this day, like very, very little you're going to change in those contracts. It's all going to be work for hire. Any characters you create, they're going to own, and you just know that going into it. Do you want to work with them or not? The royalty now, that was the insane part. But if I didn't want to do anything to have them peek under the hood. So I got the license. I mean, the cash advance through credit cards and whatever, and and it was just when you're that young, I guess some people, everyone's attitudes are different. My attitude was like always, I'm wanting to learn more, and I just always gave way too much benefit of the doubt to the people at these companies that like they care about the characters, that they understand it, and that they have a system. I had already seen all these other companies send style guides to the t-shirt place, and I worked at another t-shirt place before that had like Looney Tunes licenses and stuff. So I saw professional quality, super detailed style guides, and I'm expecting Hasbro to have all this stuff. And so I roll in like with all these like ideas for promotion and everything, and and I'm like asking for the reference material, and by the way, I could have published it myself, or at least I deluded myself into thinking I could have pulled it off. I partnered with Image Comics, so Devil's Due got the license, and then Devil's Due partnered with Image Comics to release it first, and then Jim Valentino ran the company back then, and he was like, who the hell's this kid? He only agreed, I think, because this other marketing guy told him like, you have to do this, because he was probably like, what the hell is this G.I. Joe crap? And then fans freaked out. I had set up, how Wizard magazine was like, that was like the thing, like everybody bought Wizard magazine every month to get the latest news and interviews and comics, and they had been doing these like fantasy like updates of like J. Scott Campbell would just draw like a 2-page spread of the Thundercats, and then he would draw G.I. Joe, and he would draw Transformers, and I mean it was phenomenal. And that's another reason why I didn't understand why people didn't realize how excited the audience would be for it, because this in Wizard people were freaking out over this stuff every month. So I had been in touch with the reporter, the couple writers that wrote most of those interviews for the 80s stuff, and so I had lined up that Wizard magazine gave us a big spread that G.I. Joe's coming back, and it was just so funny how out of touch even the comic retailers at the time were with it, because they were older, they just it just wasn't their time, and they didn't get it, and there had never been any kind of a retro phenomena like this before, and they didn't really take it seriously. And I mean generalizing obviously, but they had to listen to all the people calling the shops, demanding the book, and I had that all lined up at Wizard, And then
And sort of just circling back to Wizard as well. There was the very influential Wizard 111 from December 2000, which had the, you know, sort of predicted the 80s nostalgia come back, and they had GI Joe and Transformers and He-Man and the Turtles and all these kind of things. What kind of impact did that have on you? Obviously, that you used J. Scott Campbell for your covers. Was that kind of a direct line? And did it have any other kind of inspiration for you other than maybe helping validate the fact that you were onto something that was, you know, in the background of people wanting this stuff?
it was more, and this gets into the certainty of it and why they're like that kind of cast away any fear. It didn't give me validation. I just thought everyone already thought this. You know, like yeah, everyone knows this is going to be huge, right? But so I would always, whenever I got resistance from people, I just didn't understand. I'm like, why don't you get this? And I mean, that was like, I had to fight image management once we got that deal, because they kind of like got it. It's a whole different regime there now, but the management back then was like, I think it kind of surprised them, and then they got a little, and like, they don't really do the business of studio books other than like their founders, and they, you know, they do more. They had done like Pat Lee's stuff, and they really do independent creators one-on-one, and they put a limit on me. Jim said I could only do bi-monthly. I could not put it out monthly at first. I had to prove that we could do this. So he didn't know how crazy serious I was about doing it all. And also it kind of stunned me. I found out that the retailers really didn't get it either. And I was like, people have been coming in your stores for the last 2 years with these t-shirts. This is in Wizard magazine every month. Like, how was this not obvious? But then, and then with Wizard, the cool thing was, you know, I think it was probably the reporter or the writer, James McDonough, who worked for Wizard. It's hard to remember, man. We met everybody at Wizard. James McDonough was the main, like, one of the main 80s writers. There was Matt Senreich worked there, who later ended up starting Robot Chicken with Seth Green. There was all these cool guys there. I think one of them probably put me in touch with J. Scott Campbell, and I just went to J. Scott Campbell and say, hey, I cannot afford you probably, but like everybody that worked on that book got a crazy deal, because I paid way too much for the page rates, because it was all based on faith. And everybody that came on board, you know, just, you know, believed it was going to be successful. And Campbell gave me his rate, but he was down. He agreed to do it and be paid later. But when people really lost their minds, when people first saw what we were going to be bringing to the table, was on a G.I. Joe message board. I don't even remember what it was called back then. There was this phenomenal painter named David Michael Beck, he was one of these old school, like, he's about 50 years old at the time, professional, like, commercial artist, and that was near me in Cincinnati, and he painted that Snake Eyes picture from the back of issue number 1 cover. When we put that out in the public, everyone just went insane. And you know, and because it's the first time you'd ever really seen Snake Eyes captured that realistically, like, and it looked like a movie poster. If you ask me, they ripped it off for the movie poster for the Ray Park Snake Eyes movie. So I was like, okay, this is my one chance. This is also me not just starting the publishing, but this is how I get to be known as a creator in comics. I mean, I had a whole vision for how to bring G.I. Joe back, and so I redesigned all the main core characters, put Shipwreck, got him out of the bell bottoms and the old school Navy outfit, and got updated you know, all those characters. And I made slight tweaks to Snake Eyes. I wanted to make sure we had the visor version, but then, like, gave him like the little Batman capsules, the utility belt capsules, but on his wrist, and put the Arashikage logo on his shoulder, which had never been on his costume before. Yeah, and then so the book had like 69,000 pre-orders. Oh, we did have one way we funded more stuff was crowdfunding didn't really exist yet, but I started taking pre-orders on subscriptions. So I said issues 1 through 4. I don't know, it was some probably stupidly low price. I think like $12 or something, which meant I was going to eat shipping later. But I just took the orders on the website and I wrote them down manually on a piece of paper. And I had like 1,000 or something, pre-order subscriptions ready to go. And, you couldn't just go on stamps.com them either. You had to like, I just slugged all that stuff to the post office. And they hated me. This big, super gloomy, like Art Deco 1920s era post office on the north side. But we had that ready to go, and then Image. I found out Image would make you a preview book, and they would consider that part of the promotional budget. You wouldn't have to like. So and I'm like, it doesn't cost anything or anything. So, and they asked if I was going to go to San Diego, and this is 2001. They had like I think San Diego's attendance then was like 40,000 people. There was none of the big companies there, and it was just Image had a 20 by 60 or 20 by 80 like pavilion of booths, and we were one of the booths. And I was like, oh my God, that's how I afford to get to San Diego. We'll make this book and we'll just sell it there. And man, we sold like, I think to this day, it's one of the most successful selling conventions I've still ever had. We just sat there with our little army green plastic containers and some military camo tarp thrown over the booth and sold books. And that got us through until that, like 3 months later, that first check came in from issue 1. So pre-orders were already like insane. They were like 69, 70,000 copies. I told Image I wanted to print 100, and I got yelled at that I was crazy, and I said it's going to be our money at the end of the day, right? Like, it's coming out of my bottom line, right? You just take that, and like you guys just charge the flat fee, and he's like, yeah. So I said, well, print 100, please, and we sold out of that instantly. And then, of course, the craziest thing after this being my life for almost a year, 9/11 happens, like the day before G.I. Joe comes out. So, I mean, it was just such a weird moment of, like, what the hell's going to happen? Am I going to get drafted? Like, what's the real fears of all that stuff back then? And that definitely, I think the next day people came in the store and like there's this big American flag nostalgia G.I. Joe thing on the shelf. Definitely did not hurt, but kind of like the way the inefficiencies of the comic market are, it's hard to get new books there. Like it's pretty much sold out already before it even hit the shelves. So we ended up that officially kicked off, the 80s wave. I think one thing that we do not get nearly enough credit for, I'm usually just trying to be grateful and, not, but comics was not in a great spot then. Like Marvel was coming out of its bankruptcy. They were finally letting like Joe Quesada and Bill Jemas mess around and do all kinds of weird stuff with the characters, which I loved. I loved all those weird Marvel books back then. That's when the Ultimates came out, and they were really trying to rebuild that. We probably brought in, I don't know, 50,000 people, into comic shops who hadn't been collecting, and who, were, I don't know how many times, it's been at least like 200 times, in person at shows where people said, you know what, I had left comics, but then G.I. Joe was back, I had to come back and check it out. And then they get there and then they see like, oh my God, I didn't even know Marvel was doing all this stuff, and there's all these new books out, and then they've got the bug again, and then they're hooked. So we really got to play a part in helping the comic industry as a whole come back, even though people, we're all nerds, so most of the retailers just bitched that like this 80s stuff was annoying and when would it go away, while they were selling like a bunch. But or it was funny because there was a time where a lot of older creators were like kind of snarky towards us about like the 80s stuff. They didn't take it seriously, but for some reason, a guy jumping around in tights that had a TV show in the 60s and 70s and 80s is also more serious.
Was there any upside to only being allowed to publish bi-monthly, did it let you catch up with your team, or was it a problem?
Oh, is it, man? You're talking about once you had the confirmation that this is going to be a massive like hit. That probably was a lost opportunity of, I don't know, $500,000. I mean, because I mean, that's just, I mean, we were ready to go. So one thing we did to try to speed it up was they let us put out battle files, which was just like, okay, I'm like, hey, we want to put out these like Who's Who books, like DC Universe or Marvel Who's Who, so they said we could do that, and then so that was allowed. I was able to get out like a nice, like $5.99 book or whatever it cost at the time, with nice perfect bound book, and then kind of supplement what we were putting out so we could ride that wave. And then I think, and then after that 4 months we were onto a monthly schedule, and then we put out GI Joe Frontline, and then by then, I mean, the second GI Joe hit, I mean, the 80s wave was officially kicked off, and so Dreamwave went in and got Transformers. And I very specifically, all the way back in that when I was in my apartment in Cincinnati, I was like, I could go for G.I. Joe or I could go for Transformers. Transformers has never really gone away. And I remember that conversation where they were like weird about it, and they would focus on Beast Wars. And I was like, well, G.I. Joe is dead. Like this really crappy version in the 90s of Extreme came out, and this thing is dead. I'm going to go for G.I. Joe. I didn't understand how completely unknowledgeable Hasbro licensing was about that G.I. Joe. I asked for style guides. They didn't have any, so they tried to put some stuff together, and they sent me FedExed me Xeroxed black and white pages of some random mix of characters from I don't know, some kind of kid style guide thing, and it was like Duke from one of these weird early 90s, towards the end when the line was really about done. I don't know, it was like Duke flying with a jetpack, and he looked like a Silverhawk or something. And I was like, what is this? No, this is not the Joe we're doing. And I asked about Snake Eyes, would it be okay to use this for specific version of Snake Eyes? And I swear to God, the answer I got was who? So I got verbally berated on a constant basis by this guy that ran the licensing department at the time, who was not a pleasant human. Just livid that I put a dominatrix in G.I. Joe, that I put this pimp in G.I. Joe, that I put the Hell's Angels on a cover of this beloved child's property. I'm like, these are your characters, guys. It was so bizarre, and so we really had this attitude of keeping our head low. I was like, that's maybe to a fault. That's also how rather than argue with someone, I'm like, if you don't get it, that's fine. I don't need to have a conflict. I'll just put my head down and go work, and so
were you able to just put him right in a kind of calming way of saying, well, actually, they're these characters, or
Oh yeah. Well, I know. I had to, because but we had to change stuff all the time. I mean, the issue 3, I think it was Zartan was on the Chameleon. Well, J. Scott Campbell actually drew Zanya and Zartan on that, and it was a awesome picture. Plus, I created Zanya, so I'm like, oh my god, this is one of my characters in here too, drawn by effing J. Scott Campbell. And they just thought it was way too sexual, and I'm like, that's his daughter. And then the scene where it's issue 10 or 11. This is where the weird subconscious kicks in. Suddenly I know these issue numbers. 10 or 11. It was Zorana was on her bike, and it was just images of some Dreadnoks and stuff in the background, and I had to take some out because they were they just thought this looked like some inappropriate biker comic. It was a very weird time. I didn't learn until literally in the last few years some of the dynamic going on with Hasbro and how G.I. Joe was very important to the family, the Hasenfield family, and there was this beloved attachment to the classic, 1960s and 70s GI Joe, and then the one the one brother that really ran the show in the 80s passed away. The regime after that, like it's kind of like they just weren't there for that part, and they never. It's like, guys, this was the biggest thing ever, and you don't even realize it. And they have this weird like kind of affinity for the original, to the point that at the time there was a disdain for the 80s stuff. So I was putting the book out with a company. I had the license, and the company didn't like their own property. They had, they wanted to put they put a guy in charge who really wanted, he didn't like the 3 3/4 stuff. He grew up with you had to deal with licensing, you had to deal with the toy side, you had to deal with the PR people, and you get so the guy in charge of toys, there was some Joe stuff in the early aughties where you saw a kung fu grip thing or something like that on Duke or something. They tried to bring those 12-inch things back and push those. That was all that powers to be really wanting terribly to get the old stuff to come back, but people just want the 80s characters. So that was weird to deal with. And then also I found out that the guy in charge of the toys actually he made a run for the license as well, and he lost to me, and I didn't know that till later. And then they had a problem with at the time, their mentality, they did not yet understand, comics already knew this. Hey, you can have Batman that's for preschoolers, you can have Batman that's for 9-year-olds, and you can have Frank Miller, stuff that you will you don't read until you're 12 or 13, and even then you're not supposed to. Hasbro was like, if it's not suitable for a 5-year-old, this is a failure. We are a children's toy company, and that is what we do. No appreciation for how they had this maturing, evolving brand. But meanwhile, this thing's taken off like a freight train, right? So everyone's anytime we would get national press and USA Today or something, then Hasbro PR call why didn't you clear this with us? And I'm I don't control what people cover. You're welcome. How about a thank you? And then getting yelled at for these characters being in the book, getting an Image kind of being skittish at first, oh shit, this has gotten too big.
Because particularly with the first issue, was that the biggest selling Image title of the month, and how did that track over time?
Yeah, it was actually, if it hadn't been for Paul Jenkins, shout outs to Paul, if it hadn't been for Paul Jenkins, the Wolverine Origins, G.I. Joe would have been the number 1 book once you calculated all of the sales for the month. Not based on pre-orders, but once you calculate the final sales. So we were number 2, and then it stayed. It was definitely Image's top book. And then everything we did, we quickly got the Voltron license, and then I got the Micronauts. That was a little before my time, but that kind of fell in our lap. And we got we were doing a bunch of other stuff. So we were crushing it. I think at one time we were 20% of Image's business. This is back when Robert Kirkman was just, he had the really savvy idea of getting Eric Larson to let him use Super Patriot, and mess around with some of Larson's dormant characters. And so Robert kind of did his own licensing thing. So this is how long ago that was. There was no Walking Dead yet or anything like that.
He made a pitch for G.I. Joe, right?
Oh yeah, I was told that story. He wanted to do a thing about Destro building a base on the moon, and I was probably a little bit too taking the continuity so seriously at the time. But I was like, that's not really. That's a little more too much like the cartoon. We're not there yet. Now I would be like, hell yeah, we'll find a way to do it, and we'll make it badass, and we'll make it cool. And we won't. But I was like, that's a little too cartoony, and he's just like, man, y'all lack vision. So, he was just kidding around, but
Can you talk about building your own company? Because at one point it's just you, and then you are hiring an artist, I mean, penciler, inker, and you've got like a staff artist, designer, and you've got like you're paying rent. Can you talk about building the company, like the office, and finding people?
Oh yeah, it's funny. The first, for the first several years, your office is just your apartment, and then when it hit, and I was like, I'm gonna really need a place to go. There was this little place above a 7-Eleven. It's still there in Chicago, right by the Brown Line, which is that's our tube. It's like an elevated train. There was this little office. It said offices starting at $225 a month. So I went there, and it was technically it was a closet. It was 8 feet by 8 feet with no windows, which city of Chicago means it's a closet. That was my first office away from, like my house.
Was the bathroom down the hall? It was not in.
It was next to the bathroom. So
did you have to get a key for it?
Oh yeah. I was and then we took over like an actual real office space, which is probably like a 20 square foot or 400 square foot little room next to the closet room. and then we finished it up. We took over 2 other offices, so we had like half of this top floor, and then finally I moved over to a really big place that I got built out on and everything. And then it's funny now these days I'm actually getting my first office that I haven't had an office in like 8 years, and I'm getting one again, a formal, centralized office for meetings and stuff. But we're still all decentralized now. I mean, one person's in Los Angeles, one person's in Michigan, a couple people here in Chicago.
Who were the first people you hired in 2001?
2001. So I just ran. I'm trying to remember. There was this other dude named Josh that I hired just to help, who had worked at the animation studio. So he was out of a job. And then I just, as far as creative, I started this guy, Chris Crank, who I'd known through like mutual friends and like who had like punk bands and stuff in Cincinnati. He was always doing web design back in the day. And it's funny, man, if I don't even know where these things exist anymore. But if you go back 20 years ago, we were doing like flash animated trailers for our comics that like 5 years ago Marvel would release like a big deal, but we were doing that back then. Just there was no social media or anything, so it didn't go viral, hopefully some Joe fans remember those. He came on to help me do web design. I think I just had that one assistant. My ex-girlfriend worked, I can't remember if she lost her job or what, but she ended up running marketing for a long time. Nobody was really trained for all these things. Just started doing, And then I brought in this guy, Marshall Dillon, who became assistant publisher. He was working there. And so now Chris Crank to this day is actually, Chris and Marshall both letter, like, it seems like damn near half the comic books out there. They just both converted into lettering. Then Tim Seeley came in to work full time, but he didn't come in to work on G.I. Joe. I had offered him G.I. Joe first, and he didn't think he was good enough, and he suggested Steve Kurth. But Steve Kurth was always freelance.
How did you know Tim Seeley? Where had you met?
We met at a Chicago convention in like '98 or something, and I had this comic called Penguin Brothers, and like a little black and white comic, and the dude one of the other dudes that worked on some of the books with me back in the day, this guy, he was trying to hit on this like cute girl that was talking to Tim, and that's like, so then and then I don't even remember how, I know somebody brought Tim over to our table, or they brought me over to his table, and we back then you would just keep in touch on the phone, and you would email sometimes, and you would mail each other pages and work on projects together and try to get stuff going. And So Tim had redrawn this whole thing I'd done called Minotaur. He redrew the whole damn comic, and then I can't remember why I didn't publish it. It might have been because it wasn't because G.I. Joe hit. I just can't remember what happened there. So he turned the job down. He had a pretty solid job in Minneapolis then, and didn't, and he just didn't think he was good enough to handle G.I. Joe, and he suggested Kurth. And then I ironically later, as soon as I had anything and I had the money, I hired Tim to work on this book Core, which was again another reboot of the Minotaur thing. And so Tim was awesome at drawing big giant monster dudes. So he worked on that book, and then I needed someone. I wanted to do a lot of that stuff in house if possible. And so then Mike Norton came on to work on Voltron. He did characters, and then somebody else did backgrounds. And so then, kind of like before you know it, you've got, okay, we had one office with a few people hanging out drawing, and a couple people hanging out drawing, and then another office like kind of like admin stuff going on with like about 3 different people. There was always like 1 or 2 interns in the mix, and then I had an office room that I shared with this guy who was kind of like my assistant, and then that's really how that built up. And I always built, I guess kind of the curse is like I actually do have a knack for building out those operational structures, and I'm really good at building systems and that work well when people follow them. I'm not very good at riding people's butts to I'm not good at riding your ass to make you follow the system, but I'm always just like, look, here's the system. All right, now everyone go do your job. And now if something goes wrong, the first thing we do is, did you follow the system? Is this your fault, or is this a problem with the system? If it's a systems problem, just let me know, and we need to fix something. And this stuff, you don't realize this until later. When you have that kind of goal and you just want to get in and you create the business out of the necessity or impatience of wanting to be hired, you don't want to wait. So you build the business because I just want to make comics. But you've got other people are just like, hey, I want to start a business. What's a good idea? What's something that would be good to start a business about? What's profitable? So they think about it that way. And but I just, and that's actually a smarter way to do it. But I'm just like, this is just because I want to make shit, and I want to make enough money to be able to make more stuff, and I want to not have to worry about it doing anything else. I want just to be able to do this forever, and that's what a creator wants to do, really. So
I was going to say you're doing an awful lot on the creative side. You were writing G.I. Joe, and multiple titles concurrently. You, I guess, were overseeing a publishing empire and an employer of an increasing number of people who sort of relying on you for their living. So quite a big weight of responsibility. Given the enormous, I guess, sort of responsibilities and the work involved in spinning all of those different plates, did it, were you able to retain a sense of fun in terms of getting into it to create comics and live the dream? Were you able to actually enjoy it while you're riding the roller coaster?
We did, but it wasn't like we had time. We made time, but we're also Chicago is very much a party, pub town with bars on every other corner. And I mean, we're, it's notorious for being open till 4 or 5 a.m. for some of the bars. And we all partied, we would work. Everyone was in their 20s. We would work that's the thing. I mean, we weren't run like most comic art studios where it's dudes just want to draw and they get a studio and there's no real set schedule. I mean, we were there, the company, people showed up 8:30, worked till 5 or 6. Almost every book was licensed, which is extremely difficult to do with all these approvals. And you're dealing with these corporations with just people that have day jobs that they just want to, validate their job and making a comment on something and make your publishing life difficult by default. So we busted our asses, and every book came out on time. Like, we were always on time, and then, you know, I'd get off work and then go to the gym, and then, you know, a couple times a week we would go out and, you know, drink until like 3 a.m, and then we it was just a grind. And I used to joke, I used to have a running gag with like these like Pakistani immigrants that owned 7-Eleven that was under us, and they would joke like who was gonna work later, because like I'd be there till midnight a lot of times. I mean, I had a really bad diet soda pop addiction. I would drink diet sodas like crazy. The fountain, like the big, like you're talking like a, you know,
bucket
a
of
2-liter size cup. You know, it was bad, and I really started to fall apart when I was like 25. Started having lots of muscle problems and pain problems, and 26. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes with a racing heartbeat, just stressed about payroll or something, and it's funny, I'm not the only person in the company who would have like nightmares about Hasbro approvals. Like, you would have dreams that you got a book was late, or you got an approval rejection. And then I started to really fall apart around 26, 27. I had all these back problems. I don't even know if people paid attention, but I brought in this weird like cane thing for massaging your muscles I would always have on hand, and that was not good. And on top of like I don't want to get into around 2008, 2007, I let trying to expand the company and trying to get some actual business help. I brought in really like some of the wrong people to like help take over running the business side, and did not end well. It was just not understanding, you know, just everyone's different dynamics and how some people's motivations are.
Did you kick the diet soda addiction?
Yeah, so I the good side of there was like it was a blessing in disguise, because I mean this is a goofy little personal side thing. Yeah, I just started I learned about getting like a good mix of like chiropractic and massage, and I learned a lot about supplementation and all these different like herbs I could start to take, and like other just nutrients and supplements I could take. I switched over to those carbonated like LaCroix sodas, carbonated sodas. I started crushing like 12 packs of those, and I would drink I drank coffee instead, and all that. It was like all of a sudden after 5 years of torture, like one day just felt totally fine, and it was like a miracle, and it like happened that dramatically. And then for the next like 5 or so years, I'd still always have to like worry about if I didn't get a massage and stuff, I might hurt my back or something. But now I'm in my 40s, and like I don't have any of those problems. I feel better now than I ever did. So it's kind of a blessing to feel like shit in my 20s.
Wake up cool.
I looked a hell of a lot better, and I actually had muscles. But
Can you talk about doing layouts for the opening arc and working with Steve Kurth, or is that an outgrowth of writing the initial arc?
I always forget that I did the layouts. Yeah, that was kind of how I.
And for number 5 too, I think.
Yeah, that was kind of how I wrote that way, you know, because one was part of like conscious decision. Like I wanted as much creative credit as possible for very, you know, like just, you know, selfish, like I need to make a claim here. This is my one shot to like get my name out there as a creator, so I'm gonna write it, and I want to do some kind of drawing on it. So that's why I redesigned the characters, and then and I did the layouts, and then at some point it was just like, okay, I can't keep doing that. You know, Steve got it, Steve. But that, you know, if you do draw, if you've grown up where you've always written comics, and you can draw, sometimes, you know, you'll get to a point where it's just easier to sketch it out. Like usually it's the if it's a very specific fight scene, or if it's maybe a lot of times if it's just like, say, 3 people just talking, but something's happening and you're like, okay, I got to get it straight in my head. Where are all these characters? You know, literally like where they're standing would affect like what they're saying and what they're doing. So you'll just switch over, scribble it out, and then depending on how long you've been working with that artist, you might not even send them the full script. You might just say, oh, hey, just here, do this. Alan Moore does that kind of stuff all the time. You'll see his little awesome little thumbnails. So that's
Did you allow yourself to get paid like a page rate for writing the first issues or the first 2 years, or was that sort of a freebie because you were getting paid for owning the company?
I just paid myself a salary. I had real official employees versus I didn't just have contractors. I paid a salary, and then I would be able to take any profit at the end of the year in the company, and if I wanted to, I could pay myself more. But you know, I'm a comic creating junkie, so I just would put all the money back into the company, and the company never really would make money. We would just expand and do more comics, and I never really paid myself much more than like $40,000 a year back then. As much as we were, I was able to buy a car, buy a condo, and all that stuff, and then then I upped my salary a little bit. But in hindsight, what I really should have done was just kept putting out those books. Don't try to expand. Just crank out. Just stockpile all that cash, write it and milk it till it's done, and then take a year off and decide what to do. But I was thinking like the same goal. I was like, I want to be able to do this forever. Something like I need to expand this and
get it to the size of Image or Marvel, trajectory to the future.
Yeah, but the on the company side, just that gets into like, I don't know if the audience is interested in that stuff, but I structure there's different ways you can structure it in the US, and also different states have different rules, but you can either do a corporation where you like a S corp or a C corp where it's taxed a certain way. It's its own private entity and it's taxed, and then what you get, you pay yourself on your paycheck tax, or your payroll tax is one thing, or then your dividends are taxed a different way. So, or you can do an LLC where it just all flows through to the owners, but you can write off all your deductions. So there's really no separation between my life and my business. I mean, so I don't need a car when the company can just have a car that it's going to be using for stuff, and I don't care about having certain like most of my house is taken up by kind of like office stuff and studio stuff. Like, if you really stripped away what my personal life was like, it could be like a studio apartment. Like, just because it's a privilege to get to work in this business, and it's like, this is what you're going to do anyway as your hobby, right? So there's really not a division.
Yeah, you just surround yourself with it.
Yeah, and there's the work-life balance thing isn't even really like a applicable argument there. Like, balance as far as like, yeah, don't like work yourself till midnight every night and grind yourself into a bad health state like I did. But as far as like, once you got stress levels managed down and you know how to do that, I mean, you're like, yeah, do you want this to be your life if you get to do it all the time?
You speak with so much passion for making comics. As a reader before 2001 and before 1996, what were the comics that really grabbed you? And did you have a place where you bought comics?
Yeah, we went around. I'm sorry, what did you say?
What were the comics that moved you the most when you first got into reading them?
Oh, so ironically, at first it was not superhero stuff at all. The first comics I ever read religiously was literally G.I. Joe. And everyone always asks what issue it was, and I really cannot remember.
18.
But I think it
18.
may I think it may have been one of the special missions where Snow Job we talked about, and Stalker, and maybe was it Outback? I don't know. were all trapped. Were they trapped in Trucial Abysma? I don't remember. I just opened it up and I saw like, oh my god, they actually use real bullets in this. And Dad, can I have this? That got me hooked on G.I. Joe.
Where did you get those comics?
7-Eleven or some other convenience store like that on a spinner rack.
Awesome.
Okay. Was there did you have an older sibling, or was there like a neighbor or a parent who already approved of or like fed you comics, or did you like were you the person in your family who started comics?
There was no real like geeks in my family at first, but well, no, that's not. Well, my dad was. This is before that really culture existed. No, my dad always had comics some kind of comic laying around, but not like he wasn't really a comic reader. He was like a Conan reader and a Thor reader.
Cool.
But mostly Conan. Conan would show up in the mail.
Oh, wow.
And this is so funny because Larry Hama was actually the editor on Conan, and years later he was laughing when I told him that because he's like, our #1 fan mail for Conan came in from convicts. My dad was a super creative dude. Like, he's the kind of guy that like he doesn't like the way something in the house looks. He'll knock the wall down and rebuild it all. And like, there's a picture of me when I'm a baby. I was born 1977, and he's holding me, and I'm scared shitless, and because Darth Vader's holding me, and it's this like now what looks like a pretty kind of goofy Darth Vader outfit. But he made that all by memory by himself, like molded the helmet, molded the plastic at a factory he worked at, and got the electric setup to make the lights for the box inside. And he actually got hired by some movie theaters to stand outside on weekends. And then he won all these Halloween costume contests with it at the nightclubs. And my mom, when they were still married when I was a kid, like her and some of her girlfriends, they would all dress up and they would all wear white. So they were like stormtrooper chicks. So there was that like always that creativity, and then my mom herself. I don't ever remember them being married because they split when I was a kid. But my mom's super creative too. Like none of them. My dad would draw and try to like I would ask him to draw me pictures when I was little, but he would like copy stuff. My mom's like super creative about just making cool little things for you to play with, or like you'd come home one day and I decided to like take all your little. I had these little play school astronaut toys, those cheesy little like cute. They're kind of like Lego people but bigger.
Like little flat feet.
Yeah, and I had this like a little space ones, and I came home from like first grade or something, and she had made me like a moon base out of tinfoil, like that kind of fun creative stuff was always happen. And they say that like no one ever told me to or anything. I was like 2 years old and drawing, and they said you were just always obsessed with drawing from the like you were just came out the chute for that, ready to do that. And so I drew a lot. Like I would just sit there. I was like this weird 4-year-old that would sit still for 2 hours and draw pictures.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, like, and then they always supported that. So it was always the belief like, yeah, if you want to do a job that way, yeah, you could totally do that. So I was encouraged. Like it was always a very open like, well, yeah. It wasn't like, can you do that? It was like, well, figure it out, So, because I can't remember being, I don't know, 5 years old, telling people I wanted to make cartoons, and they would reference like Sunday Funny comic strips, and I would get frustrated because I didn't have the vocabulary to explain. No, I need to make the cartoons on the TV, like the cartoons that move. And then finally, I learned animation at a very young age, and I like wrote letters to Disney when I was like 9 years old. Like, how do you do this? And they would actually write you back. You could literally, as a kid, you could just write a letter to the company. Hey, there's no internet, so how do you do this? And they would send you brochures and stuff on what it's like to be a Disney animator, and DC and Marvel would send you rejection letters. I got rejection letters when I was like 13 years old, sending in terrible drawings. So that was just, there was never that thing. It wasn't like ever being worried about failure. It was like, okay, yeah, you figure this out because you're gonna mess up on you got to figure out how to do it. So, and we don't know how. So that. But never
an idea that it wasn't a possibility.
Yeah. now I think I scared him a little bit when I got into like running off to like I probably terrified my mom. She probably quietly freaked the hell out when I just one day was like, I'm moving to Chicago, bye. And setting up this company and then they show up like, they don't, my parents are terrible about traveling anywhere. So they finally, come to the city a couple years later and I've got a whole office with a staff and they're like, what the hell? They're like, well, keep doing what you're doing.
This is our kid.
Yeah. And in turn too, when things are hard and you're really stressed and you got trouble, you can't explain to them exactly what's going on. And then, I mean, it's funny now, like when it comes to like Hollywood and all that stuff, like we used to have an office out in Los Angeles and we used to work with all these celebrities. And I feel like we're just barely getting back to where we were on some of that stuff. And my family now is more excited than they've ever been. And I'm like, you not realize what the hell I was doing in like 2007? I was flying to LA every 6 weeks and like these but you know what it was? They weren't on social media. Like they didn't actually see any evidence of these things happening other than like a random phone call or something. So it's always weird with family when you're trying to explain that stuff. But the pivotal moment where I was like, I truly just became a huge comic book nerd was my Aunt Claire took me to see the Michael Keaton Batman movie. And it blew my mind. I had no idea that. I think I got excited before that because they were hyping it up, but I had no idea that Batman was like a badass. I thought I was like 12 or something.
The hype for that movie was huge.
89. Yeah, I mean it was. There had never been anything like it, and we were, it was that age where like I had no idea that the Adam West Batman show was this genius satire thing. I just thought that was dumb, and I was like, oh my god, you mean Batman's awesome? So I begged my mom. So my stepdad was in the Air Force station at Fort Meade, Maryland then. So I would be with them all summer. And then my dad had moved to Florida. So I bounced around a lot, which is another reason why typical story of like you're by yourself a lot. You asked if I had siblings. I was siblingless until I was 7. And then my mom had my first sister. And I have 3 sisters now with my mom and stepdad. And so I'm like, my baby sister's 13 years younger than me.
Oh wow! And
then also I'm an only child, like over half the time when I'm with my dad down in Florida, and I was like I hated being in Florida. I just hated that state, like in general. Like not to, the area we were in, like I was not in a fun. I was just it's a dead area with nothing happening. But that drove me to be bored a lot and draw a hell of a lot of comics, and write. And then my stepdad was in Maryland, and I begged my mom to take me. It was this comic shop somewhere in Laurel, Maryland, outside of Baltimore, and they had the Killing Joke and the Dark Knight collection and the greatest Joker stories ever told, greatest Batman stories ever told. That marked DC back then. They really had their shit together on making sure all those Batman books were ready to go for the people coming into the stores. And I was the poster child example that movies work. Movies drive readership. And so then my stepdad had like a bunch of siblings, and 2 of his younger brothers were kind of into X-Men, and my one uncle Alan, he drew a lot. So I was always excited to talk to them, and they're like teenagers. And I brought up like, did you know that Robin is not even Robin anymore? He's called Nightwing. And then my uncle shows up with like 2 plastic grocery bags full of Teen Titans George Perez Marv Wolfman comics. And he's like, here you go, buddy. That was like the summer of 1989 or 90. I just devoured all those and became a hardcore DC comic book nerd, and never gave 2 craps about Marvel. that's because that's like I just got so in the rabbit hole on that, and I read Batman religiously for years. And
that's what happens. You pick a side early, and you're a lot of times you're on that. You might stray, You know, you might read a Kingdom Come or maybe slog through Crisis on Infinite Earths, but nah. Marvel hooks you when you're early. You're a Marvel kid for life. Same with DC.
Yeah, and then I got into the Marvel stuff in my 20s when Gemis and Quesada were doing all kinds of weird experimentation, you know, and I got
there's some cool stuff back then.
And then when the Ultimates line came out, I was like, awesome, I don't have to learn the continuity. I'm gonna and these were like badass like stories. But really though, then I mean, what I organically felt to after that though was like I just loved. Well, all right, so Ninja Turtles, right? That hits like. I think it was like 13 or something when that came. No, that came out. Was it 87? Something like, I don't know, like 11 or something. The same thing. I'm walking in the mall and I saw the first comics collected publications of the full color Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books where they colorized the black and white books, and I was like, what are these badass turtles? And it was like.
They were oversized. They were like 14 inches by 11 or something. It was a bigger book. I got those.
Yeah,
that's how I got them too, because I didn't have a comic shop around, and then I saw those in Walden Books. And I was like,
Walden Books, dude.
Oh,
Walden
cool.
Books.
Yeah, my Walden Books at my mall had those, and I got them.
Remember, Walden Books had one shelf, and it was called the Sci-Fi Shelf, and it was all the comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so that got me down like learning all. I started buying any black and white Ninja Turtle comics I could, and then all the other Tundra stuff, and I really loved Kevin Eastman's art the most on those. Then I actually one of my I don't collect a lot of original art stuff, but my one prized possession is Kevin drew me a Leonardo, and it's like he spent like a half hour on it, sitting next to me at a con one time, and just gave it to me. So I have that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and then Scott. So then it's like I'm a teenager, and like The Crow comes out, getting those comics, and then I mean movies really did influence a lot, but one of my favorite things was just Scud the Disposable Assassin. Loved that, and then I would you go to the dollar bins and you get 3 comics for $1, and then you're just reading. That's how you dive into like a lot of the superhero universes. But then Valiant came out when I was 14, in 8th grade. Me and my friend Arnold in Pinellas Park, Florida, got jobs. You could at 14 years old, you could get a job at this one place called Wagon Wheel Flea Market, and this was a massive, like I think 2,000 booth flea market, outside in Florida summer. But well, they were open all year round. Just when I would happen to be there, we got the jobs. We could make $4.25 an hour. We're like 14 years old. We're making $60 a weekend. We were
That's a lot of comics.
Yeah, we were like ballers.
Yeah. Great.
And it totally violated all these child labor laws. This flea market did. We would, if they said, hey, you want to work 11 hours today? We're like, hell yeah. And
so this story started off with him breaking licensing laws with a hippie publishing group,
and then being abused.
Then we
by
go back to breaking laws here. I see a pattern, Josh.
Yeah, this guy, man, this old country dude, Hardy Huntley, ran that flea market, and he hired 14-year-olds to work like
awesome
slave labor. But he did
$60 gets you 240 comics from the quarterback.
Oh my god!
Exactly. Hey, it was. You know what was funny in hindsight? This was basically like setting up a convention every weekend. They were, we had to go around.
There you go.
We had to go around, fold up the tables, throw them on the truck. One time, the truck ran over my foot while I was throwing the table on there. Jeez. I really lucked out. I was on soft ground. And then
I was lucky that day.
Oh my god. But there was a comic book retailer there, this guy Mark Fountain, and he was more than happy to take every penny we came. We just took our paychecks. We should have just given that guy our paychecks. That was right when all the gimmick comics launched. So Youngblood's coming out. This is before that. Jim Lee's X-Men's coming out. Rob Liefeld's X-Force is out. Mm-hmm. The Silver Surfer issue 50 foil cover comes out. The Ghost Rider glow-in-the-dark Mark Texeira cover comes out. Valiant Comics was kicking ass. So I bought all the gimmick stuff, but I would really get excited about reading stuff like the Valiant books. And then my stepdad got out of the Air Force, moved back to Ohio where he was from, but instead of Dayton, where we had been at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he moved to Cincinnati, his childhood, home. So that's when I moved back from my dad to my mom's, and I moved to Ohio and a whole different environment. And that's when they announced Image Comics was coming out, and just like it was so crazy. Like there was literally like front page of a certain section of the newspaper was like had Savage Dragon on it, talking about 7 artists leave Marvel. And I had always been a sucker. Like I had read, because I was obsessed with Disney animation and stuff, I read like 2 Disney biographies when I was like 7th and 8th grade, obsessed with all that stuff, and then became a sucker for any kind of like story where someone builds their own little empire. So when Image Comics happened, it was like, oh my god, this is incredible. And I learned around I think around 12, I was like, you know what, animation seems like it's really hard work, and you're like just in the background slugging away, and
tedious.
Yeah, in comics you can do whatever you want. All I ever do is draw comics. Why am I trying to look at animation? I literally draw comics every day. And so 12 or 13 was like, okay, I'm gonna be a comic book artist. And then 15 or however old, Image is announced, like these guys are doing it the right. So that's when indie comics explodes. People are offering to publish anything, and like I had a couple goofy publishers offer to publish my stuff, which no one should have. It was not professional yet. But I did end up putting out my first book like March 1996. I graduated high school in 95, drove to a convention to try to get a publishing deal, ended up not working out, and then got solicited in the Diamond catalog as soon as I could, and got the first book out then. So
good for you.
And then just kept figuring it out. The nuts and bolts of publishing really aren't that hard. You start a company that you send the book to a distributor, which right now in comics is, well, hey, there's finally options again, but they put it in their catalog and retailers can buy it if they want. That's publishing. When you really
it's like
boil
you told
it down.
your employees, it's a process. You just have to learn what the process is and then follow it. It's like anything. People act like, oh, I could never do that. Yeah, you could. You just got to do it. You just got to believe in yourself and take the chance and do it. And you did. And that's awesome. So yeah, we've been definitely high throughout the podcast on just what a big achievement it was for you to get that license at that age. And I mean, shit, like you said, I wasn't doing that at 22. I wasn't thinking about it. I was working in a comic book store, and that was cool, but I wasn't thinking about making them or going after a license. So yeah, good job.
Thank you. It puts you in this is everyone has their own path, and like sometimes it's almost like it might be a little better to do things the more traditional way and then come into it. But it's like then I tell you what makes a big difference is if somebody knows what they want to do when they're a kid, it completely changes their whole development, because they just have a different type of development, sometimes to a detriment. They might not be as social or they might it might be awkward in other ways because they were like they didn't care about the other like things high school kids care about or middle school kids care about, because they wanted to do things, and a lot of times those people can go a really weird direction too. So I hope to think I became well-rounded, I didn't understand until many years later, like in my 30s, really get a better sense of like, okay, you got to understand when you're doing business. Are you talking to an employee, or are you talking to like an owner, or are you talking to an executive level person at a company? But what's their background? Are they an entrepreneur? Have they had their own small business, or do they work for a living? Because everyone's got a different perspective on how they see things, and a lot of times small business entrepreneurs can make a mistake of like not being sensitive to that and assuming that everyone thinks about things a certain way. And you're like, oh, no, like this, this employee is not thinking about the other 5 things that affect what they're doing right now. Like they do not care, like at that company. So you finally like mature and kind of the weird thing now is though how big we were. I mean, we were like one of the top 10 comic companies in North America for a long time, and it was a whole different industry back then. We really kind of kicked off the licensing comic industry that exists today. Other than Dark Horse back then, nobody did it, and then after we started it really became like a thing everybody did, and now you have to do it if you want to be a big publisher. And I've just always, I didn't set out like my goal was never to build the biggest publishing company in the world. You know, I just want to be able to make cool shit. And also you know, it's like I got really sucked into the whole world of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, and 8 years ago was like I had learned what was going to be able to start to happen with artwork in this technology, and how that might affect comics and video games and everything else. And I've been waiting for that to happen for years now. And it was the same thing. Like, you just have to go out there, and there's no clear path. It's like people building a whole new world, and you just kind of throw yourself out there, contribute something to the community, or you make, you know, I made a comic about that stuff, like an educational thing. Started just go to conventions by yourself, show up, and you just stumble around meeting people, and then 2 years later you somehow have a network. And you know, just don't be afraid to feel stupid. is I guess the mantra.
If I change sort of tack a little bit, one of the things you were talking about earlier was the sort of the Marvel Ultimate Universe and the influence that had when that came out. And what struck my mind as you were talking about that was particularly the Ultimate Spider-Man. What was kind of notable about it at the time was how decompressed it was with the writing of Brian Michael Bendis, and it's, you know, famous for, you know, Spider-Man not actually turning up in costume for a little while, and you know, the more, you know, sedate pace that it moved at in the initial issues, and contrasting that to the initial issues of Devil's, well, actually most of the run of Devil's Due, to be fair, where it just moved at a pace, and there was you know, a lot happening in each issue, particularly that opening arc. And I wondered sort of that aspect of just cramming so much into that first arc, was that kind of how would you kind of describe that process? My kind of guess was that, you know, you know, a lifelong fan of G.I. Joe, so much love, so many ideas, and, you know, you hoped that it's be a success, but it's not, you know, no guaranteed thing. Was it just, you know, thinking, this is my chance, I want to cram everything in, you know, I'm not going to waste a single panel here?
Definitely, it was you know, the decision was who not to include, not who to include, because there's so many. But I mean, it was very clear from the beginning, like, that has to be the you know, the core most group of like those foundational Joe members, you know, from what I felt was the most popular, you know, not the very, very first run of all those Joes, but that like early, like mid 80s crew. And part of it, you know, hey, part of it is because I got to play with these toys, so these are my favorite guys. That's why, like, Shipwreck's in there, and Roadblock and everything. So it was really, I don't know, it was the first team book like that I'd ever, you know, really written. And I think it was just always about, one, the only really goals I set was, you know, I wanted to make sure it was set very seriously, like, in the comic book universe, and picked up right where Marvel left off with the same continuity. But I did want it to feel like, kind of like you were watching the cartoon, if it had been like updated and like given the seriousness of the comic book, so that, you know, all Joe fans would like enjoy it. And basically what I would want to see like a movie be like, you know, like, I mean, and then what I wanted to do with Cobra was I wanted to have it so that the Dreadnoks were like this national chapter, like the Hells Angels, and that Cobra Commander I wanted Cobra Commander to have been bouncing around the world, like having secret meetings with terrorist organizations, like in different cells, and different leaders of other countries, or who might, you know, have issues with like the US, and then to also and then he's got this relationship with this arms dealer, and then for him to finally like basically like I wanted this moment where the Joes realized that, oh shit, this guy, this was like Genghis Khan uniting all of the different rival, you know, like people in China, the different tribes to come together to fight the empire. Just like after the Roman Empire was falling, the way that the, you know, Hannibal and all these other people like pulled together all of the barbarian tribes. They just have this moment where, holy crap, this guy, Cobra Commander, has been out there and he has tied all these terrorist networks together, all these these arms, this, you know, Destro and the whole arms industry, and some leaders of some other countries, and like on the ground domestically, this entire nationwide network of motorcycle gangs and all, like these militias basically. And now he's ready to like kick off his plan, and it'd be like terrifying. And that was a little too heavy, you know, for Hasbro. and then the second that 9/11 happened, it was like any mention of like terrorism suddenly was just not going to fly. And or doing it, referencing any actual, like, especially like Middle Eastern, you know, kind of terrorist cell. So
so do you think it could have been potentially quite a different book without that real life dynamic sort of inserting itself?
I think it would have been a little more serious and you know, a little grittier, but that would have never flown with Hasbro anyway. So I knew I had to keep it light, and I just wanted to you know, the important thing about G.I. Joes, it's always really about the camaraderie of those characters, and it's about one foundational thing that Larry set up was, it's about the soldiers and it's about the camaraderie between the team. It's about, you know, it's not there, and it doesn't even say that like the powers that be in the military are the good guys. It doesn't say that the United States is always the good guy. It's about the soldiers, despite those flaws, still going forward and trying to do what's right. Then on the Cobra side, it's like basically the, you know, the U.S. military versus the Legion of Doom. You know, you got super villain casts, and so the Cobra guys are always like super fun and interesting to write. And I was just playing around, man. I didn't really have any like big plans. It was more like how do I want to see these characters updated was always kind of the goal. Like I knew it's so funny. I keep going back to like, oh, there's the breaking the laws joke. So my uncle grew up with like a lot of like the actual outlaw motorcycle gang. Like my uncle was like, he's like a mechanic savant, and he's always loved Harleys and stuff. And he just by circumstance where they grew up, a lot of his friends were in like an actual bike gang with national chapters and stuff. So I learned before Sons of Anarchy and all that, I learned kind of what that world was a little bit like. Not that I really saw like too much. So I was like, man, this is what the Dreadnoks should be like. They should have like national chapters, and they've just been growing while Cobra was away, like sleeping, you know. So now the Dreadnoks have their own thing, and let's make the Dreadnoks actually like a real biker gang, who happen to like chocolate donuts and grape soda. So that was like really building up the Dreadnoks, and then the you know, really trying to you know, really pick up on the whole Snake Eyes story and throw Kamakura in there. Kamakura was so much of like a last minute thought of like, well, he should have an apprentice. I want Snake Eyes. Kamakura, who became one of like the most popular things I ever did, wasn't even about creating an apprentice. It was more like I wanted Snake Eyes to feel like, oh shit, we're seeing Snake Eyes again. He's like full on master now. Like he's just this badass master. So he has to have an apprentice. And then it just happens that, you know, Kamakura was literally the first character in the first issue to appear from the Joes, and people instantly loved him. So it's so funny that I don't really have a good answer for you though, as far as like how because everything else I write, I obsessively build out like the world and the rules of the universe in that world and all these things, and then have the general plot in there, and then I just kind of like throw the characters in there, and they sort of interact based on the rules of that world. And I like there are things that I have thought of for the stuff I'm writing now that no one's ever gonna see, but I have to know it because it keeps me from having the character do something that would contradict something later. But with G.I. Joe, those rules were already set, you know?
Yeah, your own story Bible.
Yeah, it's like they've just got their own.
Yeah.
They already had a story Bible ready to go. And it was more about, you know, who do we want to...
What kind of general long-term plan did you have? Like, I know you put the seed for Serpentor in 16 and then didn't pick up on it until your last arc. So kind of like, did you have an idea going into it, how long you were going to be on it? And like, what prompted you leaving? At what point did you say, I got to go. I can't do this anymore?
I think I just...
Or was that what it was? Or did you just, your story was done?
Probably, it's 20 years ago, probably a little bit of both. But I was writing, at one time, so I was running the company, and we got to where we had like, I don't know, 6 full-time employees, and I had like probably 30 or 40 contractors at a time, and I was writing, at one time I was writing like 5 books a month. On top of doing all that other stuff and doing layouts and sketching. And one of those books was Misplaced for Image, which I was drawing everything except I was drawing all the characters with some background help. So I was doing all that. And, you know, that's why it's like, now I'm like, why the hell don't you just sit back and write G.I. Joe and like, you know, go on vacations? So yeah, I think it was just, you know, I probably needed a little bit of a break. And Serpentor, though, was another thing where I was like, oh man, Serpentor is such a goofy character, but he's so cool. Like, how do we...
he's a badass. We can say it.
Yeah, like, how do we bring him back and make him a badass? How do we make Dr. Mindbender more of a serious, kind of threatening character? And it's funny because all of the... Really think about it, Cobra is just a bunch of, like, the more, like, realistic Batman villains. You know, like, some of their personalities. Like, how, like, Dr. Mindbender is, like, a perfect Batman villain, you know? But, like, yeah, how do you tie in, you know, bring Serpentor back in a menacing way? And I literally can't remember how I planned it out, but I you know, I have my weaknesses as a writer, but one of my strengths is that I build up threads, and I always go back on and back around to them. Like, I never ever split off on like a side thread without knowing why what that is supposed to lead to eventually. Like, I hate making random weird mysterious things that happen that I don't have planned out on why they're happening. I have the option to leave them a mystery, but I do not ever... I feel like I've been burned so many times by awesome fiction series where you find out the writers never had any idea what they were doing all along.
Are you sure you've never read Chris Claremont's X-Men?
Or G.I. Joe, you know, Larry famously says that, you know, he makes it up as he goes along. He writes one page.
I just write one page at a
next.
time. He's always comparing to, like, he just follows the Charles Dickens model and writes one page at a time. And I like the Victor Hugo model where he never introduces a single character in his novels where there's not a reason for that character to be there, almost to a fault sometimes.
And what, you know, what's noticeable about, I guess, the Devil's Due run compared to the Marvel one is that typically, you know, it was laid out in arcs, you know, and at the beginning of an arc, it, you know, would quite often be, say, you know, 1 of 4, 1 of 3, whatever. So there's, you know, it seems like there's some planning going on as to the overall idea. It must be some overall planning of the idea of that arc going into it. So, you know, and that, you know, coincides, I guess, with collecting it into a trade in a nice package of a full story. You know, it was about that part of the thinking of how you would write is that you would kind of plan an arc, and how much of a role of the trade market was important to the way that you were, you know, working.
It was you know, that was always a thought. Everyone's always like, okay, you got to write in story arcs, and, you know, there was a lot of like rules that had previously existed, and then that was a weird decade of things changing. Like, well, you don't have to do a trade. It's better to do the floppies, and then, oh no, you have to have it ready for trade. Oh, but a trade paperback has to be 6 issues, or you can maybe get away with 4. and we were just always told different things, and it's like, well, I don't know. You're supposed to put out trade paperback collections. This is what we're doing. But they never really sold that fantastically well. The audience was really more buying the comics every month. I mean, that's where we moved, 100,000 units or 90,000 units, and the trade paperback pre-orders would come in for a couple thousand. So the audience that wanted it was pretty much getting it immediately. They weren't waiting. So I think kind of like the way it would work is I knew generally what the plot for the arc was going to be. Sometimes you would know what the next plot's going to be after that, and you want to build towards that too. But also, you would have these little subplots that take off, and you kind of want to leave some freedom to let the characters do their thing. Sometimes the characters take over the script themselves. And then you might decide, you know what? Okay, we're going to build out that arc. That we're going to actually run off with that subplot because that's interesting. What I'll kind of obsess over, though, is like I have to bring it all back to so every little thing has to come back to some bigger story that all ties together. So I think we did a good job with that, seeding the little clone kids that led up to Serpentor, and just the whole backstory with Alexandra McCullen, and I loved writing on the Dreadnoks characters. But other than that, just try to keep it fun and I think the pace itself was not. I didn't even have to try to move that along, to counter that whole decompressed trend of the era, because there were so many characters. You're just, man, everyone's vying for screen time, and then you've got message boards where no matter what you do, half the people think you're a god, and half the people think you're the worst thing. They think you're the worst thing to ever happen to the brand, and it changes every day, and then they so it's like you can either do no wrong or you're total loser piece of shit. and then it was a serious initiation there, to be the first real big professional comic to work on, to deal with the audience, that was very, very passionate, and you have to deal with something with a fan following like that. It sets it up so that that you're never surprised by that again. So a lot of people will spend years writing their own stuff, and then they get a hold of a large brand, and they're kind of taken aback by all the craziness of the fandom, and I guess we got thrown in cold water early on for that.
Yeah. I mean, you did Devil's Due did something very well, which was creating an online presence and a forum, which back in the days when this was a very new thing to do. And
I forgot, yeah, we had our own message board, didn't we?
Yeah, and there was an incredible amount of engagement there, and I think building up the community, and particularly with G.I. Joe being away for so long, reminding people of sort of talking to each other about the old stories, and whooping up a bit of enthusiasm, and sort of that community, meaning there's then this great anticipation for the book each month as it's coming out. But then as you as a creator of this thing, means that you've got a real microscope where you can see exactly real-time reaction as it's coming in.
Oh yeah.
And I guess you must have build up pretty quickly some coping mechanisms to develop some hard skin for the opinions coming through, because people aren't going to hold back, are they?
Yeah. That was nuts. And then I think I just I don't remember exactly when. Just probably a combination of all those reasons why I finally just kind of got off the book for a while, and then came back to write issues every now and then. I had a blast.
And then you started the Transformers continuity.
Yeah, I had a blast
versus
doing
Transformers.
That. Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, so right after us, Dreamwave came in to Hasbro and snatched up the Transformers license. They had hired Pat Lee at Wizard to do a pin-up, and then I just sunk everything I had, and it was just going by the skin of my teeth to get G.I. Joe out there. So but they got Transformers after the retailers learned, oh man, we don't want to sleep on this, we don't want to miss out on this like we did G.I. Joe. And Transformers was always a bigger brand. I mean, it just always dollar wise and fan base wise, it was a bigger global brand. So that book just crushed it. I mean, and then so both series were out, and there was this guy Adam that worked at Dreamwave. He ended up working for us later. I just said, I approached them. I said, we're doing I said, let's do a crossover, man. Let's do like the old Marvel crossover. I mean, I really want to do that. And I said, how about we'll do our own crossover called G.I. Joe versus Transformers, and you guys can do one called Transformers versus G.I. Joe. We'll both do our own thing. We both each keep the money for our own books. And that way we can go to Hasbro together and say, hey, we want to do this. We're both cool with it. Can you guys will you guys allow this? So that's what they did. And Hasbro we made a whole separate license just for that series. And my idea was I wanted to do basically Cobra finds the Transformers on the Ark before they wake up. And Cobra introduces themselves to the world by attacking with all these like super high-tech transforming machines, which were basically the Transformer characters as like Cobra vehicles. And then G.I. Joe was formed to stop them. So then Dreamwave did like a period piece, World War II, way more like kind of surreal style, and they had Jay Lee do the art. So I was like, perfect. These are so different than each other, you know. Like I wanted mine to be very intentionally like popcorn movie fun, and they did a more serious kind of artsy thing. And
Art house.
Then Dreamwave. That's when Dreamwave went bankrupt after like issue 1 or 2 came out, and then I don't remember how that series got wrapped up. But yeah, that was a blast, man. We did 6 issues. The book sold phenomenally well. We did a huge omnibus collection hardcover for it, and yeah, it was just 6 issues of. Actually, I think some of those elements there's some scenes in there that I'm like from that first Michael Bay movie. You're like, man, this looks like it was right from the comic. Especially when Starscream.
Well, there's a lot in Rise of Cobra from Reinstated. We noted a lot of things that you created in that early run that showed up in the 2009 movie.
Oh yeah, I'll take all the credit for that as long as you don't blame me for the movie.
Take credit for the good, but not the blame for the bad.
Let's use the nanomites to destroy the Eiffel Tower. Oh yeah, and honestly, man, even like it's so funny of all the characters to like say like, hey, that's my design. Because with Snake Eyes, I didn't really do much to Snake Eyes, but I did tweak some things, and the things I tweaked, they used like the little wrist gauntlet that looks like a Batman utility belt capsule thing on his one arm, and the Arashikage symbol on his shoulder. Like that just had never been a thing before, and literally kind of like copying the David Michael Beck, you know.
Yeah, we noted that too.
Like they literally said this, do this,
Do this.
to the photographer. Man, we were treated like so terribly by them. Like that's when we lost the license. It was like there was so much weird political stuff. It's a whole other podcast of like, from everything I've learned through, you know, like it's almost like a documentary detective like piecemeals thing. You hear stuff from different people, and
it sounds like this whole thing would make a good book.
Oh yeah, basically, I can't prove this, but from what I've been told, is the head licensing guy at Hasbro wanted to buy Dreamwave, and they were going to make Dreamwave the be-all, end-all of everything creative at Hasbro. They were going to develop all the artwork in-house and develop new intellectual properties, and they would publish all the comics, and that deal apparently was literally like down to the point of like there was contracts written up, and then what they didn't, and they had always just had a problem with us because they hated how we were doing G.I. Joe because they didn't understand G.I. Joe, and then when I sold like 100, and then we had to be, I think we sold 150,000 copies by the time we did all our reprints of the first issue of Joe, and they're like, yeah, well, why isn't it 250? and like, so we were always kind of treated like these kids that didn't know what we were doing. And when it came, and then Dreamwave was just like beloved because Transformers sold more, and they didn't have a problem when robots killed robots. And then I found out, oh, they were gonna buy Dreamwave and make them part of the whole Hasbro team, and this guy in licensing was probably gonna cash out with a huge, check, a bonus or something, and then they went bankrupt, and turns out, they were not run as much like a company as we were, and so everybody thought we were gonna get the Transformers license. That's what everyone. So they're like, well, of course it's gonna be Devil's Due, and they gave it to IDW, which was super weird at the time. IDW just published horror books, and Hasbro was so against anything that wasn't like kid friendly. It was so weird when they gave it to IDW. That's not even like saying like they had to give it to Devil's Due. Like, why didn't they give it to Dynamite? Why didn't they give it to any of the other companies that were submitting to them? And so that was odd. And it's like, what I learned was, that deal for Dreamwave there's no way to put that together without sabotaging any goodwill about Devil's Due internally at Hasbro. That guy had to be planting, seeds that we were incompetent and stuff all, to get that deal done. And when it came time for the movie license to happen, they started grilling us about like, do we know how to handle like, oh guys, thanks. This has been cute. This little book you've been doing for 7 years, but now we're going into the big leagues, guys. Now we've got a movie coming out, and this movie's going to be the biggest thing ever. And are you guys capable of handling that kind of distribution? That's the kind of shit that they would say to us. And meanwhile, we had renewed these licenses over and over again and sold. I'd paid them over $1 million in royalties. And we had the Family Guy license. We were like in Blockbuster Video and Borders and Barnes and Noble and Hot Topic, and I mean, we had all of the top other Hasbro properties and all kinds of other brands, and doing stuff with movie companies and everything else. And they just, this weird like insinuations started coming from them to us. It was so bizarre. We did this kind of humiliating dog and pony show of like trying to defend why we should keep the license. I'm still mad at myself I ever even allowed myself to go there. I should have just told them, I would handle it a completely different way now, and I'm pretty sure I would have kept the license. But that's kind of weird how it ended with them. Like, and it got really, really hard. It got so hard to work on the books by that time with approvals and stuff, because it was so, you couldn't do it. Like, all of a sudden there was like 50 new eyeballs looking at every single thing that came through for approval, and they wouldn't let you do anything. Because they were terrified of, that it wasn't going to be perfect and it was going to mess up the movie launch. So it was like, everybody was so like over working on it. We were just all exhausted and spent, and like we couldn't handle dealing with all the bureaucracy anymore. And so everyone just kind of, I think we were relieved when it was finally, gone. And then, a year later, I wish we had it back because it was a lot of money. but I mean, that book didn't make a lot of money for many years. I mean, IDW has put out a lot of G.I. Joe books that have sold 5,000, 6,000 copies. And I don't know how much money they had to eat to do that, So it seems like it's really finally ticked up now. And the book Larry's been doing really solid. And now I think for the first time, I think Hasbro is actually, the way they're doing the Snake Eyes movie now is how I told them they should have done it 15 years ago. I mean, this is do the origin story, start it, build it up like this. I mean, they're basically, I won't know until I see the movie, but it sounds like they're pretty much just doing a slightly tweaked version of our Snake Eyes miniseries, our Snake Eyes Declassified series, which is obviously us just building upon Larry's story and putting more of the dots together and clarifying things a little more. But I'm excited. I've never been more excited. I've been, as a fan who just got to like be a part of this property for a decade of my life, I look back on it as the fan and say, I just wish they would get the shit together with the brand. Like, it's they've got one more shot. They've done 2 shitty movies. They got one more shot to get it right.
Come on now.
And if they do, I was like, they either need to do like a video game, like an incredible video game that like really brings them back into the public consciousness of like younger people, the same way that Deadpool was and Deathstroke the Terminator was. Those both got hype in video games, and Harley Quinn got a lot of hype in video games, and those all played a part in bringing those brands to like the next level. do that with GI Joe, or possibly, you know, I don't know, like they have some movie that's done right or some big thing that's done right. Otherwise, it's going to go the way of Buck Rogers, where, you know what, finally the existing fan base is too old to get any new people in, and it's too much of an old concept. And then, you know, then with, like, I'd say Buck Rogers because, like, when I'm like 20 years old, I look back at old Buck Rogers art. I think that stuff looks awesome, you know. And I buy a poster, like a Forbidden Planet poster or something to hang on my wall. But those toys aren't coming back, you know.
Oh, we don't know if you're going to drift into the toy market. I saw Back to the Future action figures the other day.
Yeah, well, I think
we could get Buck Rogers.
But there's a difference between the like nostalgia action figures and like a mass market thing like Hasbro buying and pushing Power Rangers toys.
Yeah. Well, I think they're doing it. I think Hasbro is saving GI Joe. I think the Snake Eyes movie is going to be huge. I think the toys, like, you already can't get them. Every time they put them out on the shelves, they're gone. They'll probably they put Snake Eyes in Fortnite. They seems like they're really intelligently introducing you know, some of the most core characters, and they're gonna unveil, like, you know, this is what you're supposed to do when you have this world you're introducing a new fan base to, is you're supposed to, like, have some character who you get to learn about the mystery that, you know, the veil's lifted and you learn about a whole other world you didn't know existed. Like, it's typical Joseph Campbell stuff, you know, hero's journey. It's Snake Eyes is going to learn that this thing called Cobra exists, and there's a whole effort to stop them, and it's going to introduce us to the G.I. Joe team. And I really hope they blow his face off, you know, and stay loyal to it. And then that there's, like, I really hope they establish some kind of G.I. Joe guy later. Like, I hope there's that moment where, like, Hawk and Stalker or somebody go find Henry Golding with his blown off face living in the mountains somewhere, and they're like, we need
Are you a werewolf?
I can imagine the discussions amongst a couple producers and writers where it's like, well, Henry Golding's really handsome, popular, and expensive for a second movie or a third movie. It's like, okay, well, all right, so we'll blow his face off at the end of the second movie.
Yeah.
But he's going to be like shirtless and like maskless for most of the second movie. You know, it's like, how do they sort of like hang on as long as they can before he can't speak and he's just always wearing a mask?
If not, man, Ryan Reynolds will be there like, hey, I'll do it.
That is an amazing comparison with Deadpool, because you have these like rules in movies with hiring actors or keeping a brand going, or like having something that's PG-13 but not R, or R but not PG-13, and then 5 or 10 years pass and like the rules get rewritten. Like Deadpool is a great example. It's like, oh, people aren't going to see this, or like, well, the actor's not going to want to keep their mask on because they want their face to be seen. It's like, no, everyone just loves Deadpool.
Yeah, I just love everything about the development of that film and how, like, he leaked it and just basically forced Fox to make it. It's wonderful. You know, and I think I know this is going to be like the most controversial opinion on Snake Eyes, but I really think from what I've seen, it looks like they made really smart decisions on how to keep it feeling like G.I. Joe, but to distance a little bit from the purely military aspect of it and purely U.S. military empire, you know, elements of it. I think, you know, it'll be a little bit more of like, in the way that the Dreadnoks are not, you know, military, but they're a real force and a real threat. You know, some of the G.I. Joe element could also be written the same way, where you still keep the same core important parts of who those characters are, you know, just like, so if Henry Golding is, you know, maybe, I guess, you know, he's clearly British in this, so he's not going to be an American, but the important part of the story is that he's, I think they probably should have kept him in the military. I don't know what the backstory is going to be there yet, but, you know, the important part is he's an outsider, and that Storm Shadow is part of this clan, and that he saves Tommy's life, and that he's brought in, and, you know, that's the important part. As long as he just can't be another Japanese guy, you know. So they'll probably throw in some characters. They're probably going to make the Joes be from different parts of the world, because I just know how insanely worried about that they were on the other movies. They were really, really worried about, we can't have the real American heroes. It's just not going to play in any other country. We can't do this. It won't work. It's got to be more of a global force. And I don't see how they would have gotten over those worries. Still, I'm sure Hasbro's still probably going to be pushing to do that. But meanwhile, they put out the Captain America movies and they all kicked ass, and they did it in a really smart way, and the whole world liked them.
Yeah, do it good. That's all we ask.
Just follow the comics.
People are gonna like it.
Hey,
yeah. Imagine that.
Larry never wrote the U.S. government as like a benevolent, perfect entity. It's like,
not really.
There were the jugglers, and there was the corruption, and then but I mean, he's done interviews about that where he talks about you see the absolute worst in humanity in war, and then you see like the most heroic, amazing things you can imagine. So that's yeah. So I mean, no, I'm excited, man. I'm hyped. Actually, I'm gonna go see Black Widow today, and I keep saying Snake Eyes because I keep thinking it's like that's more on my mind.
When I saw Black Widow last week, there was a trailer for Snake Eyes, and for a moment I was like, I'm having the best of both worlds. Yeah.
It looks like a G.I. Joe movie anyway. It's so funny, too, because you're seeing Black Widow, you're seeing Scarlett Johansson, and then you see the trailer with Scarlett, with that actress with red hair, and you're like, wait, what?
Scarlett, yeah. I wondered if I could touch on a point you mentioned a little while ago about Hasbro and the relationship there. And I had, I think, 3 questions which maybe you can cover off. The first one was, you had the license for a fair amount of time. Was it generally a little bit fractious, or was there peaks and troughs where maybe someone came in who got it before being swapped out for another job? The second question was kind of like you talk about the licensing approval kind of thing. Typically, how long would that take, and how difficult did it get in terms of approving things? Things being rejected, or did you just get to a point where you just preempted everything and tried, didn't get the no's because you knew what those would be? And the third question was, how long did you kind of have the license contract at a time? So was it like a 12-month that kept on getting renewed?
Yeah, sure. So I had the approvals were, the licenses, there's always like a little bit of a stress to any license, because there's always a little bit of good faith you're putting in there, especially with a large corporation. You typical licenses are 3 years. I think the Transformers one might have been shorter because that was like a one-off project, but so every 3 years you're going to have to renew that. And now the etiquette in the licensing business world is, hey, as long as everyone is doing well, you have some loyalty and you keep working with those companies. You build good relationships with your licensees because you want them to come back and keep licensing other stuff. And then every now and then it gets competitive, and you're always worried like, this is a mega corporation, are they going to get greedy and just cast us aside? Usually what happens is you kind of milk the property and the sales wane off enough that the licensee just doesn't want to renew, and then it goes away for a while and someone else picks it up. Because the relationship was always so tumultuous with Hasbro from day one, and they always were like sometimes like viscerally upset at the books we would submit because they didn't like their own characters. It was always weird, It always felt very stressful and nerve-wracking that and then when Dreamwave came along, and and when IDW got Transformers, they would heap praise upon them, so that was always like really awkward. So we were always afraid, and running the company, I'm just always afraid every day. I was like, oh, I should, appreciate this while it lasts. But we renewed it. I think I renewed it multiple times. I had different licenses with them, and then we had the spin-off projects like Transformers, and then the approvals would typically what licensing companies are used to doing is they'll do up to 10 days for an approval, because like you're working on a t-shirt or a statue or something, and then they get around to it and then get around to it. And when you're doing comics, you're doing like a fast-paced, this is serialized periodical entertainment, and we're like running a television show here. This is on a schedule. It's got to come out next week, that kind of thing. And Hasbro was not, they're not the best and they weren't the worst, but it was definitely always, I mean, you pretty much had to have a part-time person whose job it was just to keep up with approvals and chasing approvals, and every editor's job was to, besides editing and making a comic, they had to chase over approvals. And our editors used to keep these big like graph paper books, like just to have a easy way to make a spreadsheet by hand and just keep notes of like all these different approvals to keep straight in their head. And we would fax them over, because they would fax them back. We'd scan the art and then email it, and they'd send us like fax machine approvals back sometimes. So yeah, we got down to where you expect you'd have to give them a week. You had to build in an extra week for things, and just keep your fingers crossed that they weren't going to have a big revision. But what you do is you get the licensor to commit different stages. So you submit the plot, and they say yes to the plot. Then you can do the script, and that way they can change the script, but they can't, if they want to change a big element of the plot in that script after you've done the work. You can say, hey guys, you signed off on this, and then you get the pencils approved, then you get the colors approved, and then you get the lettering. Once you get past the line art, you pretty much go straight to colors and letters and assemble it all and send it off for one final approval. So that was just part of the gig, man. That's every single book, every single product you put out, with a license has to do that. I look back on that, and then I'm extra proud of like how great we were at putting books out on time.
And Hasbro also picked up on what you were doing in terms of influencing their own output, right? Because they put out Kamakura toys, and they put out a Spirit based on your redesign, and probably various other things that I'm forgetting.
Oh yeah,
about.
that's right. I never got that Spirit. I forgot they did that. That's the thing where it's weird. You never hear anything. Like that's where you would think the relationship would be such that they're like sending you free stuff and they're cooperating with you. But when there's a dysfunctional like breaks in an organization at a certain size, it's like there might be a toy designer working on something who loves the comics, but like his boss is like ambivalent, and then like the licensing person doesn't even know they're working on the toy or understand why you would care, because they don't even care about these comics or toys. They just want to go home. So it's just weird, Yeah, they used Zanya was the only one that really didn't get any. Zanya never had the toy made because they had that weird belief that girl action figures don't sell, which has finally been disproven now. But Kamakura, man, I never expected him. I think he's been like 12 different toys or something like that. He's been in the anime. He was in the Sigma 6 anime. He was in Spy Troops series.
He was like one of the major characters in those computer-generated CGI G.I. Joe movies that they did direct to DVD.
So I'm sitting here like,
Hasbro
hey,
never said, "Hey, man, thanks."
No, but I will. I mean, and I don't. I'm only finally just now speaking out more publicly about some of these old stories, because I think the people that would be offended are long gone. I mean, I'm sitting here like, even if they don't acknowledge me at all, for like right now, Larry is getting his like day in the sun. Like they put out the featurette with him. They are hailing. All the marketing is actually pushing this more as a comic book movie than anything else, and it's fantastic. Like I mean, Larry's gonna be in the movie. It's like this is what you're supposed to do. So if they roll around though and like Snake Eyes is a $1 billion movie or something, and Kamakura shows up, sure as hell better be giving me a shout.
Well, I think IDW is losing money by not, reprinting the Devil's Due stuff. Recently, they reprinted it once.
Don't they call it Disavowed?
Yeah,
it's in print. No, it is available. It's in print.
Is it now? What about the first volume?
Hold on, I can.
Or like, Because when I tried
let
to
me
find
go-
it, all I could find was the one that reprinted America's Elite. I couldn't find
Wait,
the
wait, wait.
one
I
that
did.
we're
I did.
covering.
Have you ever? You did ask about any other licensor coming in between, which never happened. But I don't know if you ever heard the story when I turned down Marvel for an X-Men crossover.
I did hear this. This is good.
We did talk about this.
I just now you would understand the dynamic in Hasbro was such that
Yeah.
I found
Oh
out
my
after
gosh,
the fact.
yeah.
I found out that they tried to take it to Marvel and DC, and they were probably cocky about what it was worth, and Marvel was like, nobody wants this shit, and which is why I got it, because no one else knew what to do with it, and that was the only time I was worried there might be a sniper come in and try to take it.
I'm on the Diamond site, and Disavowed 4, 5, 6, 7, and 5 of the 6 America's Elite Disavoweds are in print. So
Oh, cool.
Jay makes a point. You can't get volume 1 unless your local shop is still sitting on a copy. They can't order one, but most of it's available.
I did pitch a story to them after all these years to IDW. I said, I finally have a story. I really, and this is before I knew what the Snake Eyes movie was going to be all about too. I was like, I really feel like, I didn't tell them this, but I really feel like I had a good way to update G.I. Joe in a way that would work for them. Once again, update it in a way that would work for today without like spoiling the old story. It would have, but the only way it would work was it has to take place in the Devil's Due, like an alternate universe, which is just still the Devil's Due G.I. Joe universe, and the center of the plot is around Lady J. So that was what I thought. If fans heard that, and I was writing it, Devil's Due is going to do something with Lady J, they'd be like, what? And I think that book would sell.
You know what? There's an important anniversary coming up fairly soon, the 40th anniversary, and hopefully IDW will be doing some special projects to market. And what a great idea! 40th anniversary of G.I. Joe. 20 years on from Devil's Due, coming back with a special. Continuing on the Devil's Due chronology with some one-off special. That would be I think a wonderful project.
I think the only way it's going to happen is if the fans start like clamoring for it and start asking for it, because and being vocal about it, because this isn't me being weird and making up some weird conspiracy. Like, it was just a policy when they took over the license, Hasbro, there was some top-down order that don't ever mention Devil's Due. This is like a race. We're promoting this movie where you just mentioned that there was a Marvel Comics series, and then there was a cartoon, and now it's a movie. You never, like, these Devil's Due comics never existed. That was like the Hasbro, like if you go back, Google any press release that came out from any formal PR about that first movie, you'll never find a single mention of us unless the journalists decided to bring it up themselves. And it was just so bizarre how they wanted to just like they were embarrassed of our run or something. It was really strange. And it has to do with this whole weird backstory thing where this dude wanted to buy Dreamwave. And like, you know what? The guy got fired like a month after we lost the license. So it just gets into it is in itself it's like its own weird like novel about corporate drama. And stuff, some of this stuff I didn't learn until years later, but now I would think, for God's sakes, it's been 13 years since we touched the book, and Devil's Due is such a tiny publisher now. I just basically put out a handful of books of my own stuff, and we have the Trailer Park Boys license now, which is the first license in a decade. And I really just have no interest in building up this mega company with it. I'm working on some other things. So there's no reason why IDW should be like afraid that like a Devil's Due book would look good. Anyone at Hasbro that would have been weird about it back in the day probably doesn't work there anymore. And I would think a lot of people maybe who were like 15 years old when they were reading it are like 30 now and, work there and have a appreciation for it. But thanks to guys like you and the Longbox Crusade and other G.I. Joe collector communities. I'm starting to see it now. I'm getting people asking me about the Devil's Due books. There's podcasts covering it, and there's I'm like, okay, the nostalgia for the Devil's Due stuff is coming back. There's a lot of people who are from early 30s on down who didn't even know we ever did these books, and they're just now finding them. And
this is the first time I'm reading it.
Yeah, and part of that is no accident that there was a very conscious effort not to mention our stuff in any PR. And to a lot of people, the IDW books were the first Joe books since the 80s. So
can I go back to 2008 for a second? Because there's a short window, a surprisingly short window between the final Devil's Due G.I. Joe book and the first IDW one. Can you talk about was your next license re-up not renewed? Did they kill the deal early? Did you sort of opt out?
We knew I'm super fuzzy on exact timelines, but we knew well in advance, with the kind of the patronizing, hey, are you guys professional enough to handle this movie distribution, so we knew we were going to have to, for the first time ever, defend ourselves on why we should be allowed to keep the license. And then it was weird because IDW had basically, they had money from 30 Days a Night being such a success, and they could cut a nice check to Hasbro, so they got the Transformers license. Then they got investors from another company, which to this day is part of the whole big giant IDW conglomerate, and so they had serious deep pockets to throw at Hasbro. So I'm pretty sure that was as simple as that. But we knew okay, yeah, bad news, guys. Sorry, you're not going to get the license. IDW is going to get it. So you have until contractually, you have up until this date to wrap up the story. So we were we're going to go out with the biggest, best fucking G.I. Joe story ever, World War III, and involve everybody we possibly can. Give it the end, and we're going to end it with killing off Cobra Commander, the end. So, which is the only thing they wouldn't let us do. For whatever reason, even though these comics are going to be wiped from the face of the earth and never mentioned again, we weren't allowed to kill off the main bad guy. So he ends up sitting in an underwater prison, but
and then IDW turns around and shoots him in the face. I mean, come on.
Oh, that was really salted.
What did you think about that? You were like, wow.
I forgot about that. I just know that one of the first things I saw, I think I've read 2 or 3 IDW Joe comics ever. And I mean, I'm not emotionally connected to that stuff at all, especially now. But the one thing that we were all, the whole, anyone that ever worked for us was like, what the F is this? The first issue, Jinx was a stripper. And I mean, you got to understand how angrily we were scolded in the past for any kind of innuendo about certain things, or all these concerns about violence and being worried that moms were going to picket the offices of Hasbro with signs. I mean, and then for the guys that get the license from us, just get to immediately, do all kinds of crazy shit that we would have done too. So yeah, I forgot they immediately just shoot them.
Hey, you're welcome for that.
So, but I don't know, man. It's so weird now. I mean, I wouldn't mind being in a nice little position where Snake Eyes is, no matter what, that Snake Eyes movie doing well will help me and anyone that worked on those books, because that does mean, more invites to conventions. They start all of a sudden putting a G.I. Joe Snake Eyes reference in the credits for the guest list now means something again. Mm-hmm. To the younger, not just the old heads that come in. So that I hope whether they never even talk to me ever again, I hope that it does well. And then just as a fan, I'm gonna actually really enjoy that movie. But I mean, I bought G.I. Joe toys for the first time in years with these new incredible figures they've been putting out with the classified series. Yeah. I got my Pimp Daddy Destro sitting here. It's incredible.
A lot of people say he's the best one.
Profit Director Destro.
Yeah.
One person says it's the best one.
Two people.
Who's the other one?
My brother.
Oh, Josh.
My brother and Josh.
I've actually, I gotta get going here. I've just realized it's been 2.5 hours.
It has. You've been
It worked.
very generous
It
with your
worked.
time, and
Good job, you guys.
letting you run away
Tim
with
makes
it.
people chatty.
Okay, can I do quick fire? Couple of quick questions.
Sure.
On one of the Cobra bases, there was like an office base in Detroit, and there was a billboard at the top of the office that said trash. Does that mean something?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
It says a billboard, big billboard on the top of a Cobra base in Detroit with the word trash. We thought it might mean something, but
I'm here to disappoint.
Nightclub or something?
maybe not.
No, I have no idea.
Okay, the word
Maybe Bando's who we need to ask.
maybe the word Renegar appears a couple of times as the name of a Renegar limited edition cover by Michael Turner, and also as a General Renegar in, I think, G.I. Joe versus Transformers. Does that name or word mean something?
That is based on Michael Renegar, who was the VP of Palisades Toys. He was one of the biggest G.I. Joe fans on the planet, and he, by sheer force of will, got them the license to all the G.I. Joe statues, and they made weapons and stuff too, and incredible. They made incredible stuff. So yeah, that's him, and he commissioned his own variant cover one time.
Aha!
Oh my
right,
gosh.
Okay, so he commissioned.
You know, I met that guy.
And that's why.
I told you the story about the San Diego, like getting there with the promo book, and we got this tiny little booth. He walks up to us, says hi, and goes, "You fuck up Storm Shadow, I'll kill you." He's a whole Tennessee, like thick, like Tennessee accent, and it was so then we were friends ever since.
Awesome.
So, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, intentional or otherwise. It's been great to hear all of these stories. A real peek into some of the things that were happening in the background while we're just sort of seeing the output in terms of the comics themselves. We're in our read through end of your era of being the lead writer at the end of issue 25, but we've got a lot of quality output from Devil's Due still to read on and discuss in detail on our podcast. So maybe we can dip back in the future and discuss a little bit more of that later era perhaps. You've been generous with your time, so please use this as a platform to quickly promote your latest endeavors. Where can people find out more about what you're working on right now at the moment? Yeah,
I'm so devilsdue.net has most of my stuff there. I'm doing I actually have there are millions of people around the world that are Trailer Park Boys TV show fans. We're the official licensed publisher of a really fun anthology series. Literally, the book comes out next week. All comedy stuff, but that we're going to be releasing those comics. I got 3 of my own series right now on Mercy Sparx, which is actually in development as a film at MGM right now. If you like supernatural action with a little snarky humor in it, and then
and who doesn't?
And then I'm 2 of my like big passion projects that I'm just putting out just because I have to. I can't not tell these stories for fun. One is called The Encoded, and it's takes place in the year 2055, and the other is called Arkworld, and it takes place back and forth between the present, the Stone Age, and 13,000 years ago in the Age of Atlantis, dealing with an alternate history to Earth where we were more advanced than we were claimed to have been, and we got wiped out. And I'm implying there's no reason that these books can't actually be interconnected, even though that hasn't really been explored yet in the stories. But they both have, like, The Encoded has a generous amount of interesting, like, military characters and ninja type of characters and giant robots and a mix of very realistic grounded future theory and fun giant excuses to fight, giant robots and excuses for things to punch each other. And the man, I'm not doing a good job pitching these. The Encoded as an interesting thing. Basically, artificial intelligence hits like the singularity, and there's like a super powerful AI that we actually succeed in bringing down. But then the problem, and it wasn't even trying to hurt us though. We created our own problem. We leave all these robots all over the planet that now have to survive and defend themselves, and it's like kind of an exploration of how crazy the future is about to get with how rapidly things are going to accelerate in technology. And then, there's ninjas and robots beating each other up.
And the best way of tracking down and getting, dipping your toe in and reading these stories, is it, what's the best route for that?
Everything's at devilsdo.net, or you can go to encodedcomic.com to check out the Encoded, and go to Archeopunk, ARCHEO.com to check out the Arkworld series, which is basically about a semi-retired task force of former military agents from around the world who've been brought together by a friend to try to stop the oncoming apocalypse that's going to wipe out civilization on the planet.
Very good.
So they both kind of have semi-G.I. Joe vibes sometimes, so people might want to check it out.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, please do.
Sounds cool.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing, Josh. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you coming on. We've enjoyed looking at the series and been kind of rough on you at times, but we've definitely given you props, I think, throughout. Also for a lot of the good things you did, a lot of the pacing and a lot of your action choreography has been really enjoyable to get into, and it's just fun seeing somebody do a different take on the series. So we really appreciate it.
Okay, that's great. So thank you again to Josh for your time. And next time here, you can come back and listen to us talking about more Disavowed stuff as we continue to cover the Devil's Due era. Next up, we will be moving on to Frontline. So back with Larry Hama on an arc over in the Devil's Due world. And on the regular ARA continuity, we will continue to cover the latest issues as they come out. And we're also releasing the bonuses like sketchbook special shows. And we've got some exciting guests lined up for that in the future as well. Jay, where can people go if they want to find out more about you?
Check me out on Facebook, breakroomsketches.com. Working on a commission right now, so haven't been doing too many breakroom sketches, but they should be popping back up here and there.
Commission, fancy.
Fancy, very fancy.
Fancy.
Some might say supreme.
Don't give too much away there.
Try not to.
Tim, where can people find more about you and your interest in the world of G.I. Joe?
My website is arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. And yeah, great 3-part write-up of your interview with David Anthony Kraft, now complete. Didn't know anything about this guy or his work before, but yeah, really interesting chat that you had with him.
Thanks.
You can find out more about this show in the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to those places. There is a Facebook page with all sorts of interesting discussion and posts. There is Twitter, there is Instagram, and there is a contact us form if you want to get in touch and say hello. We're also on Patreon, so there's a big thanks out there to backers Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, and Justin, who are getting access to episodes early, as well as exclusive content, and their contributions are much appreciated to help pay for our subscription fees. So I think that is us done, and when all is said and done, you can catch us down the road.
Because we've been Talking Joe.
And we're all out of Joes.
Or Josh's. He's out of us. That was a long one. Laters.